Did you ever wonder what would have happened if Shanks accepted Luffy on his crew? How strong would Luffy become training under him? And what would happen to the other Straw Hats in this version? Well, for starters, we'll assume that Shanks accepted Luffy on his crew the moment he saw him eat the 𝐵𝐺𝐵𝐵𝐵𝐵 no Mi. This would make sense since Shanks would want to train Luffy himself in order for him to maximize his potential. This would also mean that Shanks wouldn't lose an arm to the Sea Beast, as he would already be gone before the bandits kidnapped Luffy. And although becoming a pirate was all Luffy ever wanted, as soon as he starts his journey with Shanks, he would realize that life on the sea isn't as fun as he imagined. Firstly, Shanks and the other officers will appoint Luffy to be the ship's cabin boy, meaning Luffy will spend most of his time washing the ship's floor, helping with the sails, and other random jobs. When a battle starts, Luffy wouldn't be allowed to fight, and would instead watch his crewmates swiftly deal with any threat. During his travels with the crew, Luffy would learn a lot about the world, other pirates, and the world government. This would make him far more knowledgeable than in the original story, as Garp didn't really teach him anything. Before we go any further, I want to talk to you guys about World of Warships, the sponsor of today's video. In this game, you command your fleet of ships and battle against other players. There are many classes to choose from and over 600 different ships. My personal favorite is the Battleship class, which are these huge ships that can deal insane amounts of damage. There's currently a collaboration going on with Blue Archive, where you can unlock new commanders like Shiroko or Ayane, and even get some really cool anime-themed ships. Oh, and did I mention that all of the commanders have full voice packs available? You'll also be able to participate in a fun competition by entering an invite code and have a chance of receiving a random Blue Archive commander and 7 days of a premium account. Click my link in the description to download World of Warships now and get all of these amazing rewards on the screen. One thing Luffy would notice is that none of the other crew members have any devil fruit abilities. This would intrigue him, and he would wonder how they are so strong without eating a devil fruit. So one day, Luffy would ask Shanks' right-hand man, Ben Beckman, about teaching him how to fight like they do, and how to be strong in order to protect his crewmates from any future threats. This is when Luffy would learn about Haki for the first time. Luffy would be amazed and would beg Ben to teach him. Ben would agree to teach Luffy the basics of this mysterious power, but with a catch. He would also want Luffy to learn about other things that have nothing to do with fighting, like navigation, strategy, or piloting a ship. Luffy's lessons would most likely include him doing his daily tasks blindfolded while dodging any incoming attacks from his teacher. He'd also occasionally get advice from several other crewmates to improve his skills. I imagine this would be pretty similar to how the Don Quixote family trained Law, with each member teaching Luffy a certain skill set that would be useful to him later on. Since we know that Luffy is incredibly talented when it comes to Haki, I expect him to pick up the basics pretty quickly, which would definitely impress everyone on the ship, especially Shanks. Around 3 years after joining the crew, Luffy would grow up to be a very capable fighter and would finally be allowed to participate in the crew's missions and assist in attacks. Against his enemies, Luffy would easily dodge the majority of attacks using observation Haki, and even if some attacks hit him, his armament Haki would nullify any serious damage. Luffy's progress would quickly impress everyone on the crew, and they would see immense potential in him. With his training paying off, Luffy would quickly become one of the heavy hitters of the crew and someone the other crewmates can rely on. By the time he is 17, this version of Luffy could successfully fend off the entire pirate crews on his own. It wouldn't matter if his opponents had Haki or Devil Fruit powers. Using his quick wits along with 𝐵𝐺𝐵𝐵𝐵 no Mi, he would get the job done. However, the best part about being on Shanks' crew for Luffy would be the constant partying. He loves bonding with his crew and would get excited about trying out all kinds of exotic food they'd find on their journey. It's during one of these celebrations that Shanks would reveal something very important to Luffy. He would tell him about 𝐿𝐷𝐰𝐸, the former king of the pirates. Since in this version, Luffy went out to the sea at a very young age, he probably wouldn't know how significant the Pirate King was. Luffy would most likely be shocked to hear that his captain was the cabin boy on one of the most influential pirate crews in history. Confident in himself, Luffy would proclaim that someday he's going to become the king of the pirates too. Although he'd be mocked and made into a laughingstock, Shanks would resonate with his determination and see a glint of his old captain inside him. Impressed, Shanks would entrust Luffy with his prized straw hat, albeit a lot later than he did in the original story. Upon learning about the Straw Hat's origin, Luffy's heart will begin to swell with feelings of admiration towards Shanks, and it'll push him to prove himself worthy of such a gift. And although everything is going great for Luffy right now, there's one huge problem with this scenario. You see, since Luffy is now with Shanks and didn't start his own crew, a lot of things in East Blue crew would be very different. For starters, Kobe would get abducted by the Alvida pirates and would have no way to escape and become a Marine like he always wanted to be. Pirate hunter Roronoa Zoro would get executed for saving a little girl by Captain Morgan. Buggy pirates would terrorize the East Blue and catch Nami in the process before eventually giving her back to Arlong's crew. Usopp, now alone in the Syrup village, would get stuck in the middle of a pirate's conspiracy to kill his best friend Kaya and will probably die trying to defend her. Sanji and the Barati also would meet their end after coming face to face with one of East Blue's most dangerous crews, the Krieg Pirates. So yeah, Luffy going with Shanks definitely led to some really bad stuff happening throughout East Blue. But what if I tell you that things would only get worse from there? You see, on the Grand Line, Wapol would continue to rule over the Drum Kingdom, meaning Chopper and Kureha would continue to live in hiding. All the way in Alabasta, Vivi wouldn't be able to stop Crocodile's plan on her own, which would lead to civil war in Alabasta and her death. Robin, who was hiding away from the world government, would keep working with shady organizations, all in order to survive and continue researching the world's history. Frankie would keep running a petty crime organization in Water 7 and would eventually get imprisoned by CP9. And lastly, Brook would forever drift aimlessly alone on a ship in the middle of the Florian Triangle. I think I liked the original story a bit better. Anyways, at this point, Luffy's been out at sea for around 7 years. During his travels with the crew, they would most likely pass by Reverse Mountain. That way, Shanks could pay a visit to one of his old crewmates, Crocus. This means that in this version of the story, Luffy would also meet Laboon, and might even paint Shanks' Jolly Roger on the whale in order to make it stop hurting itself. After this, the crew would visit one of the Sky Islands using the Knock-Up Stream, which would absolutely amaze Luffy. Eventually, the crew would arrive to Sabaody Archipelago in order to get their ship coated. It's here that Luffy will learn about the true horrors of the world, especially once he sees the human auctioning house and the cruelty of the celestial dragons. Although Luffy would want to do something about it, Shanks would tell him that that's not a good idea and that he shouldn't draw too much attention to himself. On Sabaody, Luffy would also get the chance to meet Gold D. Roger's former right-hand man, Silver's Rayleigh. Rayleigh would take one look at Luffy and sense the same kind of energy his old captain had coming off of him. He would eventually ask Shanks about Luffy's Devil Fruit and teach the kid a couple of tricks to further improve his haki. As the crew enters the new world, things will immediately start to pick up. Firstly, Shanks would start giving Luffy more responsibilities and eventually sending him on his own missions. Most of these missions would include Luffy going to many kingdoms oppressed by the world government in order to gain information and eventually liberate them with the help of his crew. After successfully carrying out one of his longer missions, Luffy would come back and be surprised to learn that Shanks was busy dueling with Mihawk for fun while he was away. Remember, Shanks still has both of his arms in this scenario, meaning that Mihawk would be more than happy to battle with him. It's around this time that Shanks would learn from Mihawk that all warlords have been summoned to Marineford in order to make sure Ace's execution goes as planned. One thing to remember here is that in this scenario, Luffy went out to the sea much earlier than in the original story, and therefore, he never met Ace. Although Luffy would still be happy to help Shanks rescue him, Ace would be nothing more than the former Pirate King's son to Luffy. However, before they can get to Marineford, Luffy would have to face his toughest challenge so far. You see, as the crew was sailing to Marineford, they would come face to face against the Beast Pirates, same as they did in the original story. In order to stop Kaido from trying to kill Whitebeard, Shanks and his crew would have to engage them in battle. This would be the first time Luffy participated in the fight against another Emperor crew, and witnessing Kaido and Shanks going all out, he would soon realize that he still has much to learn. Nevertheless, he would still be an important part of this fight, and I can see him taking on someone like Queen or Jack in order to help the crew out. After some battling, Kaido's crew would eventually back down, and red-haired pirates would rush towards Marineford. However, just as in the original, they would fail to arrive on time, and Ace would get executed. The rest of the war would play out pretty much the same, with Shanks ending the battle and Blackbeard making his escape. One interesting thing that would happen this time around is that Luffy would see Garp for the first time after years on the sea. Garp obviously wouldn't be happy seeing Luffy and Shanks together, and would most likely yell at Shanks for turning his grandson into a pirate. Now, at this point in the original story, there was a time skip. However, this time, there's no need for Luffy to train for 2 years, as he has already learned haki from his crewmates. So, he would just continue to sail with the crew as usual. After some time, Luffy would get to meet one of the worst generation members in person, Eustace Kid, who would attack red-haired pirates in order to kill Shanks. Kid and Luffy would eventually exchange a few blows here before Ben steps in and slices off Kid's arm, same as he did in the main story. It's also during this time that Law would meet his end somewhere on Dressrosa or Punk Hazard. The only reason he was able to take out 𝐿𝐷𝐿𝐴 was because of his alliance with Luffy, and since they didn't meet in this scenario, I just don't see a way Law would be able to do it on his own. After this, there wouldn't be any major events happening for some time, until the Red Hair Pirates decide to liberate Wano. Yeah, you heard that right. You see, in the original story, Shanks only sailed near Wano and decided not to enter the country. I believe he did this because he wanted to let Luffy fight Kaido and awaken his devil fruit in the process. Hence, he decided not to interfere. However, this time around, there would be no one else willing to liberate Wano, and I believe this would encourage Shanks to do it himself. On their way there, the Red Hair Pirates will gain intel on Wano's borders and manage to successfully infiltrate the country. Blending into the crowd, they'll slowly manage to find a few of the scabbards and would agree to work together with them in order to free the island from the Beast Pirates' tyranny. Following Shanks' orders, Luffy would travel to and infiltrate Udon in order to liberate the warriors inside so that they could fight for their own land as well. It's here that Luffy would meet Old Man Hyogoro, but this time around, there would be no need for him to learn advanced armament haki, as Shanks and other officers already taught him how to use it in preparation for this battle. I think red hair officers like Yasop, Lucky Roo, and Bonk Punch would be more than enough to take care of the 𝗕𝗲𝗏𝗏, while Ben Beckman and the remainder of the officers would fight against King and Queen. This would leave Kaido's defenses wide open, and it would allow Shanks to duel him one-on-one. The two emperors would be evenly matched throughout the fight, and to be honest, we don't really know who would win in this matchup. Sure, Shanks is strong, but can he really defeat the world's strongest creature? Well, maybe he doesn't have to. You see, since Kaido's entire crew is busy fighting against Shanks' officers, it means that there would be no one to stop Luffy from coming to the battlefield and helping out his captain. With their combined power, Luffy and Shanks should be able to easily overpower Kaido and bring his reign to an end. Now with Wano under Shanks' protection, and with Kaido eliminated, the crew would set sail towards their next destination, the Island of Giants, 𝐿𝐵𝐴. As you know, 𝐿𝐵𝐴 is already Shanks' territory, and considering it's pretty close to Wano, it would make sense for the crew to visit there. Once there, Luffy would make friends with a bunch of giants and also learn about the sun god Nika from them. Around a couple of months after they reach 𝐿𝐵𝐴, the crew would hear about what happened to the Lulusia kingdom after the revelry. News will also spread about King Cobra's death at the hands of the Revolutionary Army's chief of staff, Sabo. These events will prompt Shanks to take the next step and finally go out and seek the One Piece. It's also important to mention that at this point, Luffy still has no clue about the true nature of his devil fruit, as Shanks didn't think it was time to tell him yet. Anyways, soon after this, Shanks would receive intel regarding the government's plot to kill Dr. Vegapunk. Now, in the original story, Shanks didn't go to Egghead personally to help him. However, he did send giant warrior pirates to help Luffy and his crew. Considering nobody is there to save Vegapunk in this scenario, it would make sense for Shank and his crew to go there themselves. As soon as they closed in on the island, their presence would raise the tension, and the Marines would wind up dispatching Admiral 𝐾𝐫𝐴 and 100 warships, just like in the original. Once they stepped foot on the island, the crew would finally get to see the infamous Seraphim in action. Luffy and the other officers would start engaging them in battle, while Shanks would take it upon himself to battle S-Hawk, sparring with him just as he did with Mihawk. Ben, being one of the smartest characters in the series, would quickly deduce York's role in the assassination plot and will coordinate an attack on her. While protecting Vegapunk, Luffy would get time to talk to him and would show off his devil fruit powers. This would shock Vegapunk, as he assumed that this legendary devil fruit was still in the world government's possession. This interaction would be enough for Vegapunk to finally explain to Luffy the true powers of his devil fruit and would also call him Joy Boy. However, considering Luffy didn't awaken his devil fruit in this scenario yet, he would simply shrug it off, as he wouldn't really have a clue what Vegapunk is talking about. While the rest of the red hair crew is busy with Seraphims, Kizaru would make a sudden appearance and kick Luffy away before delivering a fatal blow to Vegapunk. Realizing he has failed his mission, and by extension Shanks, Luffy would vow to stop Kizaru before he kills the rest of Vegapunk's satellites. While their duel is ongoing, everyone would feel a sudden shift in the aura and would notice the Gorosei arriving on the island. To level the playing field, using his overwhelming haki, Shanks would immediately knock out most of the Marines on the warships. At the same time, Luffy would go to investigate the eerie presence he sensed, and would witness the entire red-haired crew trying their best to keep all enemies at bay. Out of nowhere, Luffy would get jumped by one of the Gorosei and get critically wounded. As he's lying on the ground, barely alive, he would realize that he is still not strong enough to contend with some of the world's strongest fighters. After that grueling blow he took, Shanks and his crew would think that Luffy lost his life and would prepare to avenge their friend. While the red hair crew struggles to keep the 𝐭𝐄𝐳 away from the Vegapunks, Luffy's heart would suddenly start beating again, but this time with the sound of the drums of liberation. This awakening would shock the 𝐭𝐄𝐳 and stop them in their tracks. It's at that moment that Luffy would awaken as Joy Boy, the incarnation of Sun God Nika, a warrior of liberation. Despite being unable to control his laughter and how serious he is, Luffy would use his new powers to aid Shanks in taking the 𝐭𝐄𝐳 out one by one. Although their attacks would work, the 𝐭𝐄𝐳 would instantly heal from any wounds inflicted on them. With cannon fire raining down upon the entire island because of a buster call, the crew would have no choice but to retreat for now. And since this is where the original story stops for now, it's going to mark the end of this video as well. However, if you like this one, you'll definitely like this video as well, where I explained what would happen if Luffy awakened Gear 5 in episode 1.